Some wounds aren't visible. Some battles are fought in silence, in the quiet moments when hope feels too heavy to carry alone. When a single father with nothing left to give found a broken little girl, and a mother who had forgotten how to believe, he offered something they thought was lost forever, a promise not to fix what was broken, but to stand beside them until they found their way back to life. This is not just a story about walking again. It's a story about learning to live again, step by fragile step, under the shelter of love and trust. If stories of resilience, healing, and quiet miracles speak to your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Together, we celebrate the courage it takes to believe in second chances. Now, come join us beneath the old oak tree, where the light still finds a way through the leaves. The old pickup truck rumbled down the winding dirt road, its tires kicking up lazy clouds of dust that hung in the warm afternoon air. Harlan Boone leaned forward, squinting through the cracked windshield as the towering iron gates of Willow Crest came into view. The mansion beyond was a ghost of its former self, its grandeur dulled by time and neglect. Harlan cut the engine and sat still for a moment, resting his calloused hands on the steering wheel. The smell of pine and distant rain filled his lungs, grounding him. In the bed of the truck, his toolbox clattered softly as he gathered his thoughts. Fix the fence. That's all they asked. He pushed open the door and stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The air carried a heavy silence, broken only by the distant chirp of a mourning dove. Harlan adjusted the worn leather strap of his tool belt and approached the mansion's front porch, where a woman stood waiting. She was stunning, but not in the way magazines sold beauty. Savannah Cross had the kind of presence that made the world seem smaller around her. Her hair was a waterfall of honeyed waves, pulled back neatly from a face both elegant and tired. There was a set to her shoulders, proud yet brittle, like glass stretched too thin. And next to her, barely visible behind the column, sat a small figure in a wheelchair. A little girl. Harlan slowed his steps instinctively, his heart tightening before his mind could catch up. Savannah extended a hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "You must be Mr. Boone," she said, her voice clear but distant. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Happy to help, ma'am," Harlan replied, tipping the brim of his old canvas cap. His eyes flickered to the child, whose gaze was rooted to the floorboards. "This way," Savannah said, motioning him around to the side yard without another word. The fence stretched along the property's edge, a once beautiful white rail now sagging and splintered. It had been strong once, just like, Harlan suspected, the woman and child inside those walls. As he unpacked his tools, a soft noise caught his ear, the low creak of wheels. Turning, he saw the little girl had followed, stopping several yards away in her chair. She said nothing, merely watching him with wide, solemn eyes that seemed far older than her years. "Hey there," Harlan said gently, setting down his hammer. "You keeping an eye on me? Making sure I do it right?" A tiny ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth before vanishing just as quickly. Savannah appeared at the porch steps, arms crossed. "Maisie doesn't speak much anymore," she said, the explanation as much for herself as for him. "That's all right," Harlan murmured, giving Maisie a small wink. "Sometimes it's better to listen first." He set to work, pulling rotted boards and measuring new cuts. The rhythmic clack of nails driven into fresh wood filled the afternoon. Maisie remained a silent sentinel, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. As the hours passed, the sun dipped low, casting long amber shadows across the grass. Harlan paused to wipe sweat from his brow and noticed Maisie still there, unmoving. "You sure you're not bored to tears watching an old man hammer nails?" he teased, resting on one knee. Maisie shook her head, a shy, quick movement. Savannah stepped down from the porch, then, carrying a glass of lemonade. She offered it to Harlan, who accepted with a nod of thanks. "You're good with her," Savannah said, her voice softer now. There was something fragile behind her words, like a window about to crack. Harlan took a slow sip, studying the woman before him. She wore wealth like armor, crisp linen blouse, diamond studs flashing discreetly at her ears. But her eyes told a different story. A woman who had climbed every mountain, only to find herself stranded in a valley no money could fix. "I've got a boy about her age," Harlan said, glancing toward Maisie. "Well, had. He's off to college now. Grew up too fast, like they do." Savannah smiled, though it barely touched her eyes. "Maisie used to run all over this place," she said wistfully, staring into the distance. "She'd climb trees twice her size, couldn't keep her feet on the ground." The ache in her voice was palpable, and Harlan understood, more than he cared to admit. He set down the lemonade, brushed the sawdust from his jeans, and knelt by Maisie's wheelchair. "You know," he said quietly, "wood's funny stuff. You think it's broken, all splintered and worn, but most of the time it just needs someone to see what's still strong underneath." Maisie looked at him then, really looked, and something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity? Hope? Harlan wasn't sure. Savannah cleared her throat, blinking hard. "We should let you finish," she said briskly. "You've got a lot left to do." Harlan stood and tipped his cap again. "I'll be around," he said simply. And he meant it, not just for the fence. As the sun set and the first stars prickled into view, Harlan Boone packed up his tools, feeling the strange, steady pull of something he hadn't felt in years. A reason to stay. A reason to believe. The next morning dawned bright and sharp, the kind of early autumn day where the air still held the warmth of summer, but whispered promises of colder nights to come. Harlan Boone pulled into the gravel driveway of Willow Crest once again, his old truck rattling in protest. Today, he wasn't just bringing his toolbox. In the seat beside him, carefully wrapped in an old flannel shirt, lay the battered guitar he had found gathering dust in his own attic. It was nothing fancy. The finish was scratched, the frets worn smooth by time. But it still held music, still had a voice. And sometimes, Harlan thought, it wasn't perfection that healed things. It was perseverance. He parked beneath the sprawling branches of the great oak and sat still for a moment, letting the quiet soak into his bones. There was something about this place, despite its peeling paint and cracked shutters. A kind of sadness, yes, but also a stubbornness, a will to endure. Gathering the guitar, he made his way toward the back garden. The fence work was nearly done, just a few rails left to set. But today, he had a different kind of task in mind. As he rounded the corner of the house, he saw them, Savannah seated stiffly on the porch swing, a tablet balanced on her lap, and Maisie nearby, her wheelchair positioned so she could stare silently out at the wild tangle of roses climbing the trellis. Neither noticed him at first. Harlan cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle them. Savannah looked up, blinking against the morning sun. A flicker of surprise crossed her face when she saw what he carried. "You play?" she asked, her tone lighter than yesterday. "Used to," Harlan said, settling onto the bottom porch step. "Been a while. Might be a little rusty." He gave the guitar a few tentative strums. The sound that emerged was raw but true, the kind of music that felt more like a memory than a song. Maisie turned her head, her small hands tightening slightly on the arms of her wheelchair. Harlan caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and smiled inwardly. One note of curiosity was worth 100 words. He kept playing, letting his fingers find a slow, rolling melody. Nothing complicated, just a simple tune, built from the same 3 chords his grandfather had taught him when he was a boy. Music that spoke of open fields and quiet evenings, of hope too stubborn to die. Savannah set her tablet aside, watching him closely now. Not judging, just watching. Maisie's eyes didn't leave his hands. When the song ended, the air between them felt different, lighter somehow, less brittle. That was beautiful, Savannah said softly, almost as if afraid to break the spell. Harlan shrugged, embarrassed. Just a few old notes strung together. Sometimes that's all it takes, she murmured. He looked at Maisie then, her cheeks flushed with something very near excitement. Gently, he tilted the guitar toward her. "You want to try?" he asked, keeping his voice low and easy. Maisie hesitated, glancing quickly at her mother. Savannah gave a tiny nod of encouragement, her expression unreadable. Slowly, so slowly, Maisie rolled herself closer. Her small hands reached out, trembling slightly, and brushed the strings. A soft, uncertain chord thrummed into the morning air. Maisie flinched as if she had broken something precious. But Harlan only smiled. "Sounds just right to me," he said. He adjusted the guitar on her lap, showing her how to press her fingers to the frets, how to strum gently without hurting her wrist. Maisie's tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth in concentration. The next sound she coaxed from the guitar was stronger, fuller. Savannah brought a hand to her mouth, blinking rapidly. They spent the better part of an hour like that. Harlan playing a phrase, Maisie echoing it back in her halting way. Savannah silently recording it all with her heart. It wasn't about teaching her chords. It wasn't about making music. It was about giving her a voice again. When Maisie tired, Harlan set the guitar carefully aside. The little girl slumped back in her chair, exhausted but radiant. "You did good, kiddo," he said warmly. Maisie beamed at him, a smile so bright, so pure, that for a moment Harlan forgot the world beyond this yard even existed. Savannah stood, brushing invisible dust from her skirt. "Would you stay for lunch?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself as much as him. Harlan hesitated. He hadn't planned to. There were chores waiting back home, 100 little things needing doing, but he saw the way Savannah's shoulders tightened, the brief flicker of fear in her eyes, fear that he would say no, that the small bridge they had built this morning would collapse. "I'd like that," he said simply. Savannah smiled, a real one, soft and tentative, and turned back toward the house. As Harlan followed her inside, he felt something shift within him, something old and stubborn, giving way to the faintest spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, fences weren't the only things worth fixing around here. Maybe hearts could be mended too. And sometimes, it only took a few broken notes strung together to start a whole new song. The late afternoon sun filtered through the thick canopy of the ancient oak, scattering pools of gold across the worn grass. Harlan Boone wiped his hands on a rag, squinting up at the tree's broad, sturdy branches. Willow Crest had many things broken and tired, but the oak was not one of them. It stood defiantly in the middle of the property, roots gnarled deep into the earth, a quiet sentinel through all the storms that life had hurled its way. In some ways, Harlan thought, it reminded him of someone he was starting to know. He heard the soft squeak of wheelchair wheels behind him and turned to see Maisie making her way carefully over the uneven lawn, the sleeves of her light sweater pushed up against the warm air. He smiled and walked to meet her, careful to move slowly, giving her space to choose. "You made it out here on your own," Harlan said, crouching to her level. "I'm impressed." Maisie gave a shy, proud nod, her cheeks tinged pink from the effort. "You feel up to a little project?" he asked, tilting his head toward the battered old swing hanging loosely from one of the lower branches. "I could use an expert advisor." Maisie's eyes widened with excitement. She nodded again, more vigorously this time. Harlan chuckled, leading her closer. The swing had seen better days, The seat was cracked, the rope frayed. It must have been untouched for years, yet somehow it still hung on, just like the oak itself. "We're gonna fix it up right," Harlan said. "Not just for looks, for flying." Maisie giggled softly, a sound so light and rare it lifted something heavy from his chest. Savannah watched from the porch, arms wrapped around herself, her face unreadable. But she didn't stop them. Under the great oak, Harlan set to work. He showed Maisie how to help, handing him lengths of rope, holding the new wooden seat steady as he sanded it smooth. Her small hands were clumsy but eager, her concentration fierce. Every time she completed a task, no matter how small, Harlan made sure to celebrate it. "Perfect cut," he said after she helped him measure. "Best knot-tie assistant I ever had," he praised when she managed to loop a cord correctly. Little by little, confidence bloomed across Maisie's delicate features. And beneath the heavy boughs of the oak, something else began to unfurl too. Something invisible, but just as real. When the swing was finally ready, Harlan stepped back to admire their handiwork. The seat gleamed in the fading light, the ropes taut and strong. "You want the first ride?" he asked Maisie gently. She hesitated, biting her lip. Then, slowly, she reached out a hand. Harlan lifted her with careful strength, placing her gently onto the swing. Her legs dangled awkwardly, thin and stiff, but her eyes shone with excitement. "Ready?" he asked. Maisie nodded, gripping the ropes tightly. Harlan gave her a gentle push. The swing creaked, then swayed, catching the breeze. Maisie let out a startled gasp. Then, wonder of wonders, a peal of pure, joyous laughter. It rang through the garden like church bells on a bright Sunday morning, scattering the shadows from every corner. Savannah, watching from afar, pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes blurred with tears. She didn't even try to blink away. She remembered this laughter. She remembered it from the days before hospitals and pitying glances, before the silence took root. And now it was back. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Alive. After a while, the swing slowed to a gentle sway. Maisie, breathless and pink-cheeked, looked down at Harlan. "Again," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse but clear. Harlan felt something catch in his throat. "You got it, kiddo," he said hoarsely. He pulled the swing back and let it fly once more, and Maisie threw her head back, laughing into the wind. They played like that until the sun kissed the horizon, bathing the world in copper and fire. When at last Harlan helped Maisie back into her wheelchair, she leaned forward and hugged him around the neck, quick and fierce, with all the gratitude her small body could muster. Harlan froze, startled, then, carefully, hugged her back, mindful of her fragile frame, but not holding anything back in his heart. From the porch, Savannah wiped at her cheeks, smiling through her tears. Later, as the stars began to appear, Savannah came down to join them under the oak. She held 2 mugs of cocoa, offering one to Harlan wordlessly. They sat in the grass, Maisie curled up sleepy but smiling nearby. For a long time, none of them spoke. The night was filled with soft sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of crickets, the steady creak of the new swing swaying gently in the breeze. "You did more than fix the swing," Savannah said finally, her voice low and rich with emotion. "You gave her back something I thought was gone." Harlan stared up at the stars, feeling the weight and wonder of her words settle around him. "I didn't do much," he said quietly. "Just showed her it was still there, waiting." Savannah turned to him, her profile framed by moonlight. "Sometimes," she said, "that's the hardest thing in the world to do." Their eyes met, a glance, a breath, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet. Something deeper, something slower. The quiet, stubborn beginning of trust. And under the old oak tree, with the swing swaying like a heartbeat in the dark, the first tender roots of a different kind of healing began to sink deep into the soil. The days that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm at Willow Crest, as if the house itself, weary and worn though it was, had begun to breathe a little easier. Each morning, Harlan Boone arrived just after sunrise, his old truck rattling up the gravel path. Each afternoon, he worked on small repairs that Savannah hadn't even known needed fixing. A sagging porch step here, a stubborn shutter there. And each evening, under the sprawling limbs of the ancient oak, he spent time with Maisie. Sometimes they played music together, Harlan strumming gentle chords, while Maisie plucked timid notes. Sometimes they simply sat and watched the swing move in the breeze. There was no rush, no expectation, only a quiet, patient unfolding. But today, there was a new plan. Today, Harlan thought, it was time for a different kind of push. He found Maisie already waiting by the oak tree when he arrived, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face turned toward the sky. "Morning, sunshine," Harlan said warmly, dropping a small bag of tools at his feet. "You up for a little adventure today?" Maisie turned to him, her eyes curious but cautious. "I was thinking," he said, crouching beside her wheelchair. "Maybe it's time we tried something new. Something brave." He tapped the side of the swing gently. It swayed in response, as if inviting her. Maisie's gaze shifted to the swing, then back to him. There was a flicker of hesitation, fear perhaps, and he didn't blame her. Standing, walking. They weren't just physical acts anymore. They had become battlegrounds inside her mind. "We don't have to," he said, voice low and steady. "Not unless you want to." Maisie bit her lip. Then, slowly, she nodded. A decision born not of pressure, but of trust. Harlan moved carefully, explaining each step before taking it. First, he showed her how to brace her hands on the arms of the wheelchair. Then, how to shift her weight forward, planting her feet squarely on the ground. Maisie trembled, not just from weakness, but from the enormity of what she was attempting. Harlan knelt close, steadying her gently. "You're stronger than you think," he murmured. "Just lean into me." "I've got you." Maisie clenched her jaw, her small frame tense as a bowstring. And then, with a trembling breath, she pushed herself up. For one terrifying moment, Harlan thought she would fall. But she didn't. She stood, wobbly, uncertain, but upright, her thin legs locked stiffly in place. A soft gasp escaped from Savannah, who had come out onto the porch without either of them noticing. Tears welled in her eyes, but she made no move to interfere. She understood instinctively that this was Maisie's moment, not hers. Maisie clung to Harlan's forearms, her tiny fingers digging in, but her chin lifted stubbornly. "You're doing it," Harlan said, smiling so wide it hurt. "You're really doing it." Maisie's lips trembled, and then, shyly, triumphantly, she smiled. It was the kind of smile that could melt glaciers, rebuild cities, move mountains. The kind of smile that made every painful step worth it. Very slowly, Harlan pivoted them toward the swing. "One little shuffle," he said. "That's all we need. Just one." Maisie nodded, tears pooling in her wide, brave eyes. Together, they shifted forward. An awkward, halting movement, but a movement nonetheless. And with a final, desperate surge, Maisie collapsed into the swing seat. Harlan steadied her, laughing through the burning in his chest. "You did it," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Maisie Cross, you did it." From the porch, Savannah clapped a hand over her mouth, the tears spilling freely now. Maisie clutched the swing's ropes, her knuckles white, her chest rising and falling in heavy gasps. But her face glowed, pure, incandescent pride. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't a patient. She wasn't broken. She was a girl who had fought a battle and won. They let the swing rock gently, Maisie's breathing evening out. Harlan crouched in front of her, hands resting lightly on the ropes. "You know what this means, don't you?" he teased, winking. Maisie tilted her head. "It means," he whispered conspiratorially, "I'm gonna have to build you a bigger swing." Maisie giggled, a sound that still felt like a small miracle every time he heard it. Savannah came down the steps, moving slowly, as if afraid to shatter the fragile, perfect moment. She knelt in the grass beside Maisie and brushed a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "You're my hero," she whispered, voice shaking. Maisie leaned into her mother's touch, and Harlan felt something shift in the air, a subtle, invisible breaking of chains. Hope, forgiveness, freedom, all of it blooming under the wide, watchful gaze of the oak tree. As twilight deepened, they sat together in companionable silence. No grand speeches, no promises, just the quiet, enduring knowledge that something important had begun, something that could never be taken away. And as the stars blinked to life overhead, Harlan Boone thought that maybe, just maybe, this old place wasn't just where hearts broke. Maybe it was where they learned to beat again. One gentle push at a time. The next morning dawned with a mist that clung to the fields like a soft memory, blurring the edges of the world in a gentle haze. Willow Crest stood quietly beneath the pale sky, its windows catching the first shy beams of light. Inside, Savannah Cross stood at the kitchen sink, cradling a chipped mug of coffee between her hands. She watched the garden through the window, watched the swing hanging still under the oak, and felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't dared feel in years. Hope. It was fragile, yes, but it was alive, and it terrified her as much as it thrilled her. Behind her, the floor creaked, and there was Maisie, wrapped in a thick sweater, her hair tousled from sleep, her wheelchair rolling slowly across the wood floor. "Good morning, sweetheart," Savannah said, her voice catching slightly. Maisie gave a sleepy smile, the kind of smile that made Savannah's chest ache in the best possible way. "Want to go outside for a bit?" she asked. Maisie nodded eagerly. Savannah hesitated only a moment before picking up the phone and dialing the familiar number. When Harlan Boone arrived 20 minutes later, the sun was burning through the mist, turning the world gold. He carried his guitar slung over his back like a troubadour from some old, forgotten story. Maisie's face lit up the moment she saw him, and Savannah felt that same bittersweet tug at her heart. They made their way to the oak tree together, the swing swaying gently in the morning breeze. Harlan settled onto the bottom porch step and unslung the guitar, resting it across his lap. He tuned it with easy familiarity, the notes crisp and warm in the cool air. "I've been working on something," he said, glancing at Maisie with a wink. She straightened in her chair, curious. "It's a song," he continued, "about being brave, about standing up when it's scary, about finding your voice again, even when the world tells you to stay quiet." Savannah felt her throat tighten. Without another word, Harlan began to play. The melody was simple, almost childlike, a rising, hopeful line that danced just out of reach before circling back to wrap around the listener like a warm blanket. And then he sang, "Every seed knows how to bloom, even in the darkest room. Little heart, be strong, be free. Take my hand. Walk with me." The words floated out across the garden, soft and steady, each syllable stitched with raw tenderness. Savannah closed her eyes, letting the music seep into the cracked places inside her. She thought of the years spent locked behind hospital walls, of whispered diagnoses, and endless nights filled with silent prayers. She thought of Maisie, her fierce, brave girl, and the way she had fought her way back toward the light. And she thought of Harlan, this quiet, rugged man who had wandered into their lives with nothing but his tools and his stubborn, stubborn hope. Tears slipped free before she could stop them. When she opened her eyes, Maisie was staring at Harlan, her hands trembling slightly on the arms of her chair. Slowly, awkwardly, she raised one hand and began to tap against the chair's side in rhythm with the song. Tap, tap, tap. A heartbeat. A beginning. Harlan saw it too. His smile widened, but he kept playing, his voice deep and sure. Broken wings can still take flight if they remember how to fight. Little heart, you're meant to soar. Come with me. We'll find the door. Maisie's tapping grew stronger, more confident. And then, so quietly that Savannah almost missed it, Maisie began to hum. The sound was thin and breathy, barely there. But it was hers. Her voice. Savannah pressed both hands over her mouth, the tears coming harder now, unstoppable. Harlan slowed the song, drawing it out like a prayer, giving Maisie space to join him. And she did. One broken note at a time. One brave breath at a time. When the final chord faded into the soft rustling of the trees, silence fell. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not empty. Not heavy. Full. Alive. Savannah knelt beside her daughter, brushing hair from Maisie's flushed, radiant face. "You're incredible," she whispered fiercely. "You're everything." Maisie smiled, a real, full smile, and leaned her head against Savannah's shoulder. Harlan set the guitar aside and sat quietly in the grass, giving them space. Above them, the oak branches swayed, scattering light like confetti across the world. And somewhere deep inside, Savannah felt the walls around her heart cracking wide open, not in pain, but in gratitude. Because somehow, against all odds, they were finding their way back to life. One song, one breath, one brave step at a time. The afternoon air was thick with the sweet scent of honeysuckle, and the cicadas sang their endless summer song from the treetops. Harlan Boone stood in the shade of the old oak, one hand resting lightly on the back of Maisie's wheelchair. His heart thudded slow and heavy in his chest, the way it used to when he stood at the edge of something important. A new build, a new chapter, a new life. Maisie sat stiffly in the chair, her small hands gripping the armrests. She was ready, or as ready as any child could be to step into the unknown. Savannah stood a few paces away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her breath held as if exhaling might shatter the fragile hope that clung to the afternoon like mist. "Remember," Harlan said gently, crouching beside Maisie, "you don't have to do this for anyone but yourself." Maisie looked at him, really looked, and nodded. Not with fear this time, but with determination. The plan was simple. Just a few steps from the wheelchair to the swing, a handful of feet, a small eternity. Harlan braced his arms around her, feeling the wiry tension in her frail frame. "Ready when you are, kiddo." Maisie sucked in a shaky breath, and then she pushed up. Her legs wobbled, her knees locking stiffly, but she stood, by herself. Savannah gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Harlan steadied her lightly, letting Maisie bear her own weight as much as possible. "One step," he encouraged. "Just one." Maisie bit her lip and shuffled her left foot forward, a tiny, dragging movement. The world seemed to hold its breath. Another step, and another. Slow, clumsy, beautiful. Tears pricked Harlan's eyes, but he blinked them back, focusing on Maisie's fierce concentration, on the tremble of her muscles as she fought for each inch. He saw the sweat bead on her forehead, the trembling of her lip, the way her hands fluttered like frightened birds. But she kept going. She kept going. When she reached the swing, she collapsed into it with a gasp, her face flushed and radiant. Savannah ran to her, dropping to her knees and wrapping Maisie in a trembling embrace. "You did it," she whispered over and over, the words breaking apart into sobs. "You did it, baby. You did it." Maisie clung to her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from pain, but from triumph, from a joy so pure it hurt to witness. Harlan turned away, giving them their moment, pretending to fiddle with the guitar leaning against the tree. But he couldn't hide the smile that stretched across his face, or the tears that blurred the world into a shimmering golden haze. Above them, the oak's branches swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, scattering leaves like confetti. A quiet celebration, a benediction. Later, after the emotions had ebbed enough for them to catch their breath, they sat together in the grass, the golden light of sunset wrapping around them like a blessing. Savannah leaned her head against Maisie's shoulder, her face soft and unguarded. "You know what this means," she said, her voice rough with emotion. Maisie looked at her, wide-eyed. Savannah smiled. "It means you can go anywhere you want. Do anything you want." Maisie's eyes shimmered with tears, but this time she didn't look away. She nodded. And for the first time in so very long, Savannah saw not the shadow of who her daughter used to be, but the blazing, unstoppable spirit of who she was becoming. Harlan strummed a few lazy chords on his guitar, the notes floating up into the evening air. Savannah turned to him, gratitude shining from every line of her face. "I don't know how to thank you," she said simply. Harlan shook his head. "You don't have to." He plucked another chord, slow and thoughtful. "You gave me a reason to pick this up again," he said, tapping the body of the guitar. "And you reminded me that broken things can still make music." Savannah's throat tightened. She reached across the small space between them and laid her hand over his. A simple gesture. But it said everything. "Thank you. Stay. We need you." And in that moment, Harlan Boone, who had spent so long running from his own pain, realized that maybe, just maybe, he had found a place to land, a place to build something new, something whole. The sun dipped lower, the sky painted in streaks of violet and gold. Maisie leaned back on the swing, her small feet brushing against the earth, her face turned up to the stars, beginning to wink into life. A girl reborn, a mother healed, a man finding his way home, all of them beneath the wide, watching eyes of the oak. And as the first cool breath of evening stirred the leaves, Harlan whispered a promise to the twilight. This was only the beginning. The evening settled over Willow Crest, with a hush, as if the world itself knew something sacred was about to be spoken aloud. The lanterns under the old oak tree cast a soft, amber glow across the garden, and the scent of fresh-cut grass and cooling earth filled the air. Savannah sat cross-legged on a quilt spread over the grass, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. Nearby, Maisie dozed in her wheelchair, the day's triumphs pulling her into a deep, peaceful sleep. Across from her, Harlan Boone leaned back against the broad trunk of the oak, his guitar resting idle beside him. They hadn't spoken much after dinner, content instead to soak in the quiet. But Savannah could feel the words building inside her, heavy, tangled, desperate to be freed. Harlan must have sensed it too. He said nothing, only waited, his presence steady and patient as a rock against the tides. Finally, Savannah set her mug down with a small, decisive clink. "There's something I should tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harlan nodded once, slow and sure, and so she began. "I wasn't always this." Savannah gestured vaguely at herself. at the crisp linen clothes, the polished exterior, the fortress of wealth she wore like armor. "There was a time," she said, "when I was just a girl from a tiny town in Tennessee. Wild as the honeysuckle, my grandmother used to say." Harlan smiled faintly, picturing it. "I had dreams," Savannah continued, staring out at the darkened horizon. "Big ones, bigger than I had any right to. I worked 2 jobs, scrimped every penny to get through college. Thought if I just worked hard enough, smart enough, I could build a life that no one could ever tear apart." She paused, swallowing hard. "And I did," she said. "Built a company from nothing, made my first $1 million before I turned 30. Bought this place when Maisie was born. Thought I'd finally outrun all the fear, all the smallness." Her voice broke on the last word. Harlan didn't move. He knew better than to fill the silence too soon. Savannah wiped at her eyes angrily, furious at herself for unraveling. "But life," she said bitterly, "has a way of reminding you just how small you still are." She looked at him then, raw and unguarded. "The accident happened 2 years ago. A drunk driver, no headlights, a rainy night." Her hands twisted in her lap. "We were coming home from a piano recital. Maisie had just played her first piece in front of an audience. She was so proud." Savannah's voice cracked into pieces. "I lost control. The car spun. Maisie's spine was—" She couldn't finish. Harlan crossed the small space between them and sat beside her without a word. Savannah took a shuddering breath, forcing herself to go on. "They told me she might never walk again, that if she lived, it would be a miracle." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I had all the money in the world, and I couldn't buy her legs back, couldn't buy her laughter." Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked. "I tried to fix it the only way I knew how. Doctors, specialists, endless therapies. I threw money at it like a madwoman, thinking if I just tried hard enough, worked harder than anyone else." She trailed off, shaking her head. "But I couldn't fix her," she whispered. "I couldn't fix what mattered." Harlan reached out, covering her trembling hands with his own. "You didn't fail her," he said quietly. "You loved her." Savannah let out a sob, harsh and guttural, folding into herself. "You loved her enough to fight," he said. "And you're still fighting." He squeezed her hands gently. "And maybe, just maybe, she didn't need you to fix her. Maybe she just needed you to stay." Savannah lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes wide and vulnerable. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. 2 battle-scarred souls sitting under an ancient tree, breathing in the same broken, beautiful air. "I've been running too," Harlan said, his voice roughened with old grief. Savannah blinked, startled. "My wife," he said. "Caroline. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. Took her so fast, I didn't even have time to catch my breath." He picked up a pebble and rolled it between his fingers. "I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't stay in the life we built. It hurt too much. So I packed up my boy, sold off most everything, and kept moving. Fixing fences, fixing barns, fixing everything except myself." Savannah reached out, her hand brushing his wrist. "You fixed us," she said simply. Harlan shook his head, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "No," he said. "You fixed yourselves. I just handed you the hammer." Savannah laughed through her tears, the sound wet and trembling but real. They sat there, hands entwined, the past laid bare between them like a river finally free of its dam. Above them, the stars blazed like tiny promises against the velvet sky. Promises of forgiveness, of healing, of second chances. And in the hush beneath the old oak tree, Savannah Cross and Harlan Boone found something stronger than regret. They found grace, The first rumble of thunder rolled low across the horizon, a distant growl that made the windows of Willowcrest shiver in their frames. Savannah Cross glanced up from the sink where she was rinsing dishes, her brow furrowing. Outside, the evening sky had turned the color of bruised plums, heavy with the promise of rain. The forecast hadn't mentioned storms. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped out onto the porch. The wind had picked up, snapping the swing back and forth like an anxious heartbeat. The oak's great limbs swayed overhead, leaves hissing in warning. Something primal stirred in Savannah's chest, an old fear she hadn't felt since the night of the accident. She tightened her arms around herself, scanning the tree line. Where was Harlan? Where was Maisie? Harlan Boone had taken Maisie for a short walk around the property after dinner, letting her practice standing and taking a few brave, shaky steps with his support. She had been so proud, beaming up at him like the sun itself. But now, the wind whipped cruelly across the field, flattening the grass in frantic gusts. Savannah's heart thudded painfully. She was about to call out when she spotted them. Two small figures moving slowly along the fence line, Maisie clutching Harlan's hand as he shielded her against the sudden ferocity of the wind. Relief broke over Savannah like a wave. She dashed down the porch steps, running toward them as the first fat drops of rain splattered the dust. "Come on!" she shouted over the rising howl of the wind. "Get inside!" Harlan scooped Maisie into his arms without hesitation, holding her close to his chest as he sprinted the last distance to the house. Savannah threw open the door, and they stumbled inside together, breathless and soaked, laughter bubbling up in spite of the chaos. Maisie giggled uncontrollably, her hair plastered to her forehead, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Savannah slammed the door against the screaming wind and locked it, leaning back against the wood with a shaky laugh of her own. "Well," Harlan panted, setting Maisie gently onto the couch and tugging off his dripping jacket. "Guess Mother Nature had other plans for the evening." The storm hit with full force minutes later, a fury of water and wind and flashing light. Savannah lit candles around the living room as the power flickered, casting a warm, trembling glow over the old wooden floors. Harlan knelt by the hearth, coaxing a fire to life in the long-neglected fireplace. Maisie sat cross-legged on the rug, wrapped in a thick quilt, her eyes wide with wonder every time the thunder cracked and the walls shuddered. The three of them gathered close as the house groaned around them, an island of warmth against the raging world outside. Savannah handed Harlan a mug of tea and curled up on the floor beside Maisie, feeling a strange and beautiful sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. They talked quietly as the fire snapped and hissed, sharing small stories about Harlan's misadventures building a treehouse with his son, about Savannah's first clumsy attempts at entrepreneurship, about Maisie's dream to ride a horse someday. Dreams, tiny, stubborn things, still alive, still possible. At some point, the conversation dwindled into comfortable silence. Harlan strummed his guitar lazily, his fingers finding a slow, drifting melody that matched the rain's steady drumbeat against the windows. Savannah leaned her head back against the couch, watching the firelight dance across the room, feeling the tension melt from her shoulders. It was in that soft, unguarded moment that she realized she wasn't scared. Not of the storm. Not of the future. Not anymore. The fire burned low. The storm outside raged on. Harlan set the guitar aside and stretched out beside the hearth, propping his head on one arm. He looked at Savannah, his eyes dark and thoughtful. "You're not alone, you know," he said quietly. Savannah turned to him, startled. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself anymore," he continued, his voice rough with sincerity. "You don't have to be the strong one every second." Savannah felt something splinter deep inside her, a hairline crack running through the armor she had worn so long. "I don't know how to let go," she admitted in a bare whisper. You don't have to, Harlan said. You just have to let someone stand beside you. Savannah blinked hard, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. Across the room, Maisie had fallen asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. Savannah looked at her daughter, so brave, so fierce, and then back at Harlan. And she made a choice, a simple, quiet choice. She reached out and took his hand, not with desperation, not with fear, with trust, with hope. Harlan squeezed her fingers gently, his smile slow and sure. Outside, the storm howled and battered against the windows, but inside, under the old roof of Willow Crest, 3 hearts beat steady and strong, a shelter against any storm the world could throw their way. Together. At last. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if the world itself had been scrubbed clean. The sky stretched endless and blue overhead, the fields glittered with dew, and the air smelled sharp and new, like beginnings. Savannah Cross stood barefoot on the porch, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands, and watched as the first true day of the rest of their lives unfolded before her. Inside the house, Maisie's laughter rang out, high and sweet and utterly unguarded, and Savannah closed her eyes against the rush of emotion that rose in her chest. The storm was over, and not just the one that had shaken the house the night before. The other storm, the long, relentless one, the one that had raged inside her heart for years, had finally broken, and the sun was pouring in. She smiled, blinking up at the morning sky. Today was a new day, and she was ready for it. By mid-morning, the house buzzed with a kind of joyful chaos Savannah hadn't realized she missed. Harlan had stayed the night, sleeping on the old couch without a word of complaint, and now he was outside with Maisie, hammering together a crude but sturdy ramp for her wheelchair. Not that Maisie needed it quite as much anymore. Savannah watched from the window as Harlan coaxed her into standing practice again, this time in the open yard, beneath the wide-open sky. Maisie took 3 wobbly steps into Harlan's waiting arms, then burst out laughing when he spun her around triumphantly. Savannah wiped her hands on a dish towel and pushed open the screen door. "Hey, save some dancing for the rest of us," she called, grinning. Harlan set Maisie down gently on the swing, his own grin wide and boyish. "Plenty of dancing left to go around, ma'am." That afternoon, they turned the yard into a festival of simple joys. Maisie wanted a picnic, so Savannah threw together peanut butter sandwiches, slices of apple, and cold lemonade. They laid out a quilt under the oak, and for the first time in longer than Savannah could remember, they ate without hurry, without worry, without a ticking clock somewhere counting down bad news. Maisie sang snatches of the song Harlan had taught her, her voice growing stronger, more confident with each passing verse. Savannah joined in hesitantly at first, then louder when Maisie beamed at her. Even Harlan, gruff and off-key, threw his voice into the mix, and together their laughter and music floated up through the branches, twining with the breeze. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like the world had always been this kind. Later, as the shadows grew long and the light turned golden, Harlan pulled a battered old radio from his truck and set it up on the porch steps. He fiddled with the dial until a scratchy country song spilled into the air, something about lost loves and second chances and roads still worth traveling. He offered Savannah his hand, a crooked smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Care to dance?" Savannah laughed, startled. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I," he said, mock solemn. "Could be a disaster. Might be fun." She hesitated, just long enough to feel the old fear, the old reluctance stir. And then she stepped forward. Because wasn't that the point of all of this? Learning to move again, even when you didn't know the steps. Harlan's hand was warm and steady around hers as he drew her into a slow, swaying dance right there on the uneven lawn. The song crackled around them. The wind tugged at Savannah's hair, and for once, she didn't care who was watching. She laughed as she stumbled over his boots, and Harlan caught her easily, spinning her into another clumsy, beautiful turn. On the quilt, Maisie clapped and whooped, shouting encouragements with delighted glee. Savannah tipped her head back and laughed, deep, helpless, joyous laughter, the kind that cleaned you out and filled you back up all at once. And Harlan, oh Harlan, he laughed too, his eyes crinkling at the edges, his heart right there on his sleeve for anyone to see. They weren't graceful, they weren't polished, but they were alive, and they were dancing. As the last notes of the song faded into the twilight, Savannah found herself standing close to Harlan, her hands resting lightly against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. They stood there for a long moment, neither moving away. "I don't know where this is going," Savannah whispered, the vulnerability thick in her voice. Harlan smiled, a slow, steady smile that anchored her more surely than anything else ever had. "That's the best part," he said. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering just a second longer than necessary. "We don't have to know," he said. "We just have to take the next step." Savannah nodded, blinking back tears she didn't need to be ashamed of anymore. The next step. Not all the answers. Not a map to the future. Just one brave, honest step at a time. Together. The stars blinked to life overhead, and from the swing, Maisie began to hum the melody of Harlan's song. Soft. Sweet. Steady. It was not a song of endings. It was a song of beginnings. And under the wide, forgiving sky of Willow Crest, they danced into the night. Three battered, beautiful hearts learning how to move forward again. One new day at a time. Morning sunlight poured across Willow Crest in a soft cascade of gold, touching every weathered stone and cracked window with forgiveness. It was the kind of morning that made promises without speaking. Promises of hope, of warmth, of new chapters waiting just beyond the horizon. Savannah Cross stood in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, a mug of coffee growing cold in her hand. She watched Harlan Boone out by the oak tree, the light glinting off his hair as he adjusted the ropes of the swing. He moved with easy strength, whistling under his breath, and something inside Savannah ached at the sight, a sweet, deep ache she no longer feared. Maisie sat nearby on the quilt, combing the grass with her fingers, humming one of Harlan's songs under her breath. She was different now, stronger, freer. Savannah could see it in every line of her daughter's body, in every sparkle of her eyes. Not just the physical steps Maisie had learned to take, but the steps inside, the ones that mattered more, the ones toward living. Savannah stepped outside, letting the screen door creak behind her. Harlan turned at the sound, his face breaking into a smile that made her feel like she was stepping into sunlight. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. They stood a few feet apart, the easy rhythm of the past weeks wrapping around them like an old, familiar song. No rush, no demands, just being, just choosing to stay. After breakfast, Harlan packed a small picnic basket, and they set out across the fields behind the house, Maisie steering her wheelchair along the worn paths with surprising ease. The day was made of little things. Maisie chasing butterflies, Harlan showing her how to whistle with a blade of grass, Savannah laughing until she forgot why she'd ever been afraid to. They found a spot by the river, a broad, lazy stretch of water framed by weeping willows, and spread their blanket there. Maisie dipped her toes into the cool water, squealing with delight. Savannah leaned back on her elbows, watching her daughter, her heart a messy, beautiful tangle of gratitude and awe. Harlan settled beside her, arms loose around his bent knees. "You know," he said quietly after a while, "there's something about rivers, about how they don't fight the bends. They just follow where the land leads them." Savannah turned her head, meeting his gaze. "You think that's what we're doing?" she asked, half teasing, half serious. "Maybe," he said, smiling. "Or maybe we're just learning how to stop fighting so hard." She considered that, feeling the truth of it settle deep into her bones. For so long, she had fought. Everything. Everyone. Even herself. Maybe it was time to simply flow. Later, as the sun began to dip low and golden, they made their way back to Willow Crest. Harlan carried Maisie on his back part of the way, both of them laughing so hard they could barely stand. Savannah walked beside them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When they reached the oak tree, Harlan set Maisie down carefully on the swing. The girl's face was flushed with joy, her hair tangled by the wind, her smile wide enough to split the sky. Savannah leaned against the trunk of the oak, watching them, feeling the moment etch itself into her soul. Without thinking, she spoke. "I don't want this to end." The words slipped out, raw, honest, unvarnished. Harlan looked at her, and something deep and certain passed between them. It wasn't a proposal, wasn't a declaration. It was a promise. Silent, steady, unspoken. He crossed the short distance between them, slow and deliberate. When he reached her, he lifted a hand and cupped her cheek gently, his thumb brushing a stray tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "Not unless you send me." Savannah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the truth of him sink deep. Then she leaned into his touch, her hand covering his. "I won't," she whispered. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling, hearts thudding slow and steady in the hush between them. No grand speeches, no fireworks, just a choice, just faith. As the first stars began to blink awake overhead, Harlan pulled his guitar onto his lap and began to play. A soft, winding tune that Savannah didn't recognize, but felt like home. Maisie sang along, her voice clear and sure, and Savannah, sitting there beneath the old oak tree with the people she loved most in the world, realized that sometimes the greatest promises weren't the ones spoken aloud. They were the ones lived out, day by day, breath by breath. Promises to stay, to believe, to hope. And under the vast, forgiving sky, Savannah Cross made her own unspoken promise. She would not be afraid to love again. She would not be afraid to live again. Not anymore. It was the kind of morning that felt like a secret, soft and golden, with mist curling low over the fields and the world holding its breath as if savoring the quiet before the day began. Savannah Cross stood on the porch of Willow Crest, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, and watched the first light slip through the ancient oak's heavy branches. The light danced there, filtering down in soft shafts, catching on the swing that swayed lazily in the still air. The house behind her stirred with gentle life. The creak of old floorboards, the faint clatter of dishes, the low murmur of voices. Maisie's laughter drifted through an open window, light and unburdened, a sound so pure that Savannah had to close her eyes for a moment just to feel it fully. They had come so far, further than she had ever dared to hope, and today, they would mark it. Savannah smiled to herself as she set down her mug and moved inside. Harlan was already bustling around the kitchen, slicing fresh bread, stacking plates. He wore an apron someone had unearthed from the back of a drawer, faded blue, embroidered with the words, "Kiss the cook," and the sight of it made Savannah laugh out loud. He looked up, grinning. "You laughing at me or with me, ma'am?" he teased. "A little of both," she said, leaning in to brush a kiss against his cheek. Harlan caught her hand and squeezed it, his eyes holding hers for a long, warm moment. Outside, Maisie wheeled herself into the room, her face bright with excitement. "Is it time?" she asked breathlessly. "Almost," Savannah said, crouching to adjust the delicate crown of wildflowers Maisie wore in her hair. "You ready?" Maisie nodded fiercely. "Then let's go," Harlan said, his voice thick with quiet emotion. They made their way back out to the oak, carrying baskets and blankets, musical instruments and jars of lemonade. Neighbors and friends began to trickle in, folks from town who had watched Savannah retreat into herself for years, and now came to witness something miraculous. No one spoke about miracles out loud, of course, but everyone felt it. The air shimmered with it. The swing gleamed in the morning light, its ropes strong and sure, the seat freshly polished and decorated with sprigs of wildflowers. Maisie sat nearby, flushed with excitement, her hands trembling slightly on the wheels of her chair. Savannah knelt beside her, smoothing the front of her dress. "You don't have to prove anything," she whispered. "I know," Maisie said, smiling. "I just want to." When everyone had gathered, a hush fell over the clearing. Harlan picked up his guitar and strummed a few soft chords, his music winding around them like a blessing. Savannah rose to stand beside Maisie, her heart hammering with pride and fear and wonder. Maisie took a breath, and then, slowly, carefully, she pushed herself up from the chair. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Savannah's hands twitched to reach for her, to catch her, but she held herself still, tears already streaming down her face. Maisie stood, trembling but determined, and then she took a step. One step, then another, and another. Each one small and staggering and impossibly, gloriously real. The sunlight caught her hair, the crown of wildflowers, the shine of sweat on her brow. She was radiant. She made it to the swing, clinging to the ropes for balance, and then turned to face the people who loved her. And she smiled. Not just a smile of triumph, but a smile of freedom. The swing shifted slightly in the breeze, the light sifting down around her in a golden haze. Savannah pressed her hands to her mouth, sobbing quietly. Harlan came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. Their fingers intertwined naturally, inevitably. No promises spoken. None needed. This was the promise, lived out in every breath, every step, every heartbeat. The promise that love could mend what was broken, that hope could grow even in the hardest soil, that life, against all odds, could find its way through the cracks. As the morning wore on, the gathering turned into a celebration. There was music and food, laughter, and stories shared beneath the boughs of the ancient oak. Maisie was the center of it all, her chair abandoned more often than not, as she wobbled and stumbled and stood again, always laughing, always reaching. Savannah sat on the quilt with Harlan beside her, watching it unfold, with a heart so full she thought it might burst. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid, steady beat of his life beside hers. "This," she said quietly, "is everything I never knew I needed." Harlan kissed her hair and whispered back, "It always was. It just needed time." She smiled, closing her eyes, letting the music and the sunlight and the laughter wash over her, letting herself believe, letting herself belong. As the sun began to sink low behind the trees, the world bathed in warm amber light. Savannah rose and wandered a few steps away, standing beneath the old oak's broad canopy. She looked up. The light through the leaves was breathtaking, shifting and dancing, painting the air with gold and green and hope. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, the smell of earth and rain and wild flowers, the sound of her daughter's laughter, the feel of Harlan's hand finding hers once again, and in that sacred, ordinary moment, Savannah Cross understood something she had spent a lifetime chasing. Home was not a place. It was a feeling. It was a choice. It was love, stubborn and fragile and fierce, growing in the most unexpected soil. And it was hers. At last, if you're still here, listening, thank you. You're part of this story now, and it means more than you know. Before you go, would you mind sharing with us? Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear your story too. And if these quiet little stories of hope and healing touch something in your heart, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep the light alive, and it means the world to us. Thank you, truly, for spending a few moments of your day here with us. Wherever you are tonight, may you carry a little more kindness, a little more courage, and a little more love into the world. Until we meet again, be well, be safe, and keep believing.